Grover Norquist is with us from the President of Americans for Tax Reform. Grover, thanks for joining us again. How are you, buddy?
I am doing well. Good to meet with you.
Good. I'm hoping everything is good with you and the family wherever you are down in Washington.
Absolutely. I'm actually at Americans for Tax Reform office because everybody else is home. So I have lots of social distancing.
Excellent. Grover, I'm dying to get your take on this. I know you wrote a piece talking on the steps we need to do to, eliminate red tape and avoid more taxes. One of the things that I found really interesting that I was just talking about before you came on was I think the shining star that's going to grow out of this in the long run is telemedicine.
I completely agree with you. Look, there are 300 different regulations or laws that have either been repealed at the state, federal level, or suspended because they get in the way of getting health care to people quickly and securely and in a timely manner. Everything from the FDA had a bunch of rules that nobody's allowed to do this but us, and they were busy. And CDC had a bunch of things. We have to touch everything before it's official. And a lot of power and stuff went out to the states. States have a bunch of stupid laws that they've decided to set aside. Those certificates of need where you have to ask the government for permission to put in another hospital bed or get an x-ray machine. Maybe that made sense 20 years ago when the federal government compensated people based on how many beds you have, and you didn't want a hospital just making more beds to make more money. You want beds that have people in them, that have patients in them. That's not the case anymore. Those limits now limit competition, and they keep prices too high for healthcare. It's one of the reasons New York has a problem, or had a problem. They didn't have enough hospital beds. Why? Because they had rules that said don't have too many hospital beds. And some bureaucrat decided what the right number of hospital beds in New York is, and he didn't do a very good job of it, or she. So suspending those laws or getting rid of them completely, about 35 states have them, which means 15 states function perfectly well without this stupid regulation. We have all sorts of rules. In Texas, they got rid of a rule that you couldn't put alcohol and groceries in the same truck when you were doing deliveries. What? The cabbage is going to drink all the beer. What is this? They said that this gets in the way of getting things out to stores. They used to confiscate your hand sanitizer if it was more than 4 ounces. Now you can legally carry up to 12 ounces, since we want everybody to have plenty of hand sanitizer. The TSA people have changed the rules. But your point on telemedicine, I think that's one of the biggest changes. Federal government saying for a lot of things that they look at, it's okay to do telemedicine, whereas before there were rules against it. Why would you not want to talk to a doctor who's fully awake in Hawaii instead of at 3 in the morning in Wisconsin if you had a problem? Since we invented the telephone, why not use it? When you go to a doctor, you tell him what your symptoms are, and he can tell you what your problems are. Why drive to the doctor's office? You can look at him on Skype. You can go see what little fun marks you have on your arms and legs if you got the measles or something, and you can do your temperature in front of him, for crying out loud. There's just a lot can be done over telephone lines, over computer. You can send someone your CAT scan, your x-rays to look at. No reason you have to be in the hospital with all these sick people who can make you sick every time, or to the doctor's office every time you think you have a question to ask. I think this is going to be one of the big changes, that telemedicine, online medicine will be something people are more used to. But I suggest 2 other revolutions. 2 million Americans homeschool. 35 years ago, it was illegal in 48 states. Go to jail, illegal to homeschool. Now it's legal in all 50 states, largely left alone. And people are familiar with homeschoolers because they win the spelling bees and they win the Emmys and Tebow. And Harvard even knows how to deal with the fact that they don't have A's and B's on their resume. But now every household with children, K through 12, is going to have lived through a semester of homeschooling, where you work with a computer, you work with somebody else online, but you work at home with parents. The idea that homeschooling works for a lot of people, I think we'll see that 2 million number grow. Not everybody. Some people go, I don't have time for this, I can't do it, I'm not comfortable. But increasingly, more people will homeschool, and certainly everyone will have a much better appreciation of what it means to homeschool. It doesn't mean you don't study or don't get educated. It means you do it at home with parents, with people at the other side of a computer. And the last one is online college. I was a little skeptical of it, when people talked about, is it really a real thing? Well, 10 million people are doing that for this semester from Harvard and Yale and MIT and University of Georgia. Millions of Americans are going to have a sense of what it means to do online education. It'll be an eighth of your Harvard degree this year or the next several years, because you did it for 1/8 of the time you were at Harvard. I think the respect and understanding of online college, which doesn't require huge buildings downtown in expensive areas in the middle of Cambridge or New York City, is going to drop the cost of education. I think people can do online and know that an employer knows it's a real degree because the level of understanding is greater. So I'm going to go, oh, I did that, during the virus crisis. I know that. My son did that. My friend did that. People become very confident about online learning in a way that 2 years ago they might not have been. So this could really begin to shake up education that really hasn't done anything new or different since Socrates was bothering people in Athens, sort of one-on-one education.
Wow, I could see that. To that point, my background is on Wall Street, and I come from a short-selling background, so I tend to look for overvalued situations which are going down. And when I put my business, I ran a bunch of businesses, including a division of a public company. I think every large company is going to re-examine their commercial footprint after this, because even the companies now are getting a better handle on being efficient with people working remotely. And I think a lot of companies are going to go to maybe a 2 or 3 day a week in office and rotate people. And then they're going to take down their commercial footprint expense, which is one way they're going to try to recover from this. And I think commercial real estate companies and real estate investment trusts that are heavily in commercial, I think are doomed going forward.
Well, if we get the economy growing fast enough, new companies will help pick up on that. But I think you're quite right. There's going to be a re-examination. Think about zoning laws. There are a lot of stupid zoning laws that says you can't run a business out of your house because they're afraid you'll set up a pigsty in your backyard or something. I don't know what they're worried about. But if it's just you and somebody else parking in front of your house, it's a little hard to argue that there's any legitimate reason for the city, the state, the county to mau you on what you do inside your home and what kind of business you can run online from your home, and even how they catch you if they won't change the zoning laws. I think we need to change those laws. I mean, if the left really believed all this stuff about global warming and wanting people to drive less, they would first change the rules that get in the way of working at home. Now, some jobs you need to be somewhere else, but if you can do it from home, as you say, a couple days a week or all the time, let's make that legal as well as easy to do.
Yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea. And one of the other great points I saw in your recent piece was, aside from expanding the scope of what doctors can do, you were talking about how, this practice of not letting doctors practice across state lines is just another kind of invisible way of taxing people.
It's ridiculous, right? I mean, your driver's license is good when you drive from Maine to Arizona. You don't stop at every state and have them decide whether you really should have a license because it's from Maine. And in Vermont, I don't know, maybe we don't like Maine, or we think their tests are too easy or something. If you're a doctor and you've been licensed by a state, that all 50 states should recognize that. And if everybody agrees that Delaware doctors aren't real doctors, well then say that, but you should be able to move around. And my guess is all 50 states actually have significant, reasonable rules on becoming a doctor. Maybe some of them are unreasonable. You should get rid of them. But registered nurses, anesthesiologists, people should move seamlessly through the economy. When there's a flood in Louisiana and you want to bring medical technicians down immediately, they shouldn't have this 24-hour waiting period while we think about whether you count. As Massachusetts, that was a big step forward, and Massachusetts said, oh, we're going to turn around in 24 hours. That's like to drive across Massachusetts, but your driver's license, you have to wait for 24 hours for your driver's license to be okayed. This is silly. We got computers. We got, there's no reason for that kind of link up. Arizona passed a law, and Ohio is about to pass a law that simply says if you have a license in any state, we recognize it in Arizona to color hair, to run a barber shop, to sell investment goods. Just you're fine. If you can do it in another state and you've got a license, we recognize that, and you can move into our state easily.
Yeah, I was talking a little earlier today about a famous line from, one of the most sinister chief of staffs to ever work in the White House, Rahm Emanuel, and he, had this famous saying, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." Yeah. In some aspects, it would be nice if everyone got together and used this crisis to wipe away some of this stuff that you're talking about and make healthcare more accessible, a little cheaper, a little more affordable, create competition. Maybe there could be, some collateral damage that's good.
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. What we're learning is that we have too much government, too much regulation in healthcare. It makes it, we don't move quickly enough. There are all sorts of challenges. I mean, every problem we've had has been from too much government, not too little government. Clinton, the Obama people, yes, they didn't replenish the supply of masks that they should have in 8 years while they were in the White House. But okay, you can buy. We've got masks. We bought them now. We've got them going. It's true that the Obama people probably should have resupplied the national, storage for that, but they didn't. But let's not sit here and cast blame on that. Let's just move forward and get the government out of the business of over-regulating healthcare, doctors, nurses, telemedicine. For crying out loud, telephones have been around for 100 years. Why have the laws not caught up with that? We need Uber medical care, not taxi commission medical care.
Wow, that's a great analogy. On my final note, I recently was doing some research on a company. They were the only company to answer a federal government request for proposal. And the federal government, many people don't notice, the federal government, if you're on Medicare and you take more than 3 medicines or you're more than 20 pounds overweight, the federal government gives you a free tablet, and they want you to check in with your doctor once a month. So they're actually handing out tablets for free. It costs the person nothing. They want elderly and sick people to be more in contact with their doctor. And this small company that they said, we can't even get the word out. The government's not even giving us any advice. Like, they have all these tablets they want to give out, but there's no mechanism. It's like the PPP. They had $350 billion here, and they couldn't figure out how to hand them out to all the people.
Well, if you have to ask the government, it just means several things. It's going to take longer because nobody wants to say yes because you could get in trouble. You never get in trouble for saying no, at least in the government. It's not like there's some other government that's going to come and do it better and make you look bad. And the other one is the opportunity for corruption. If you have to get the government to say yes, that's where all corruption begins. Because the guy at the other end can say, I could say yes today, or I could say yes next week or next month. What's it worth to you?
Exactly. I always, sometimes I do like these corporate talks and stuff, and when I rail against, government inadequacy, I always use the example. Right here in New York, we used to have the off-track betting company where you could go to these parlors and bet on racehorses. and the government ran the business, right? It was New York State Off-Track Betting Association.
Yeah.
And it was the only gambling operation in the history of the world that went bankrupt. Only the government could screw up a gambling operation where you get to collect fees for doing nothing except giving people information and taking money from them. And it went out of business in New York. So that just shows me, that's always my best example. You know, it's like even the government can't even run a good, clean gambling operation.
Yeah, the mob always ran a much more efficient numbers racket, and the payout was bigger. And when the government took it over and nationalized that, the payouts got smaller and smaller. The government can't be more efficient than the mob, for crying out loud. They really should not do certain things. Monopolies should not do certain things. I guess you should have one army. Makes sense. But other than that, you really don't want monopolies making decisions. They get fat, they get lazy, they get stupid.
Absolutely, and it's we're all getting maybe a little lazy right now, and I don't think it could get much stupider what's going on. We were in a huge deficit to begin with. Somewhere or another, we just whipped up another $6 trillion out of thin air. So, as an economics guy, that's about as dumb as it gets, but I guess we had to do it.
Well, the government's spending too much money. What we've avoided so far are permanent tax increases, because when you put a tax in, like for the Spanish-American War, you remember back in 1898, they put in taxes for that, like the 3% federal excise tax on your phone bill. That lasted more than 100 years. I went to public school, but I was watching the History Channel and realized that war's been over for some time. And yet the tax to pay for it lasted 100 years. We want to make sure that states do not raise taxes. The federal government's not raising taxes, but states, some of them are going to raise taxes for the virus. And in a number of years, when no one can pronounce coronavirus anymore, and it's in the rearview mirror, that tax will be funding other stuff permanently. So let's cut other spending, let's reduce spending, let's get more efficient. Raising taxes for a temporary crisis is a really bad idea. And it'll never be spent on what it's, the crisis will be over before they raise the money, and they'll spend it on something else.
Yeah, that's for sure. Grover Norquist, thank you very much. Really appreciate you joining us today for a liquid lunch, and your insights are always right on point. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Stay safe. Same with you, my friend. That's Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform.